The first thing you noticed about Kesi was nothing at all. Not her cracked lips. Not the way her back curved slightly, like the weight of the world had bent her too soon. Not even the soft shuffle of her feet across the dusty yard, long before the sun dared to rise. She moved like a whisper, a shadow passing between walls that barely remembered her name. Present, but never acknowledged. She was 16, but she carried herself like someone much older. Not because she was graceful, but because she was used to being tired. Her world was built on early mornings and dry buckets, on the sting of soapy water in small cuts that never healed, on silence. To her family, Kesi was like the wooden stool near the coal stove, or the chipped jug that waited faithfully by the tap, useful, worn, forgotten. She had hands that knew how to scrub and feet that didn't flinch when burned by hot earth. She had arms that remembered the shape of full basins and backs that never fully straightened. No one ever told Kesi she was pretty, not once. Not by her mother, not by anyone. Her mother would say things like, "Why are you standing like a stick? Don't waste time wishing for what you'll never be. Try to be useful." There was no room in their house for softness. And beauty? That was a luxury for girls who didn't have to fight the day before it ever fought them. Pretty wasn't for girls like her. Pretty was for girls whose lotion had a scent, whose wrappers weren't patched in 5 places, whose hair was braided freshly every week instead of tucked under the same old scarf. Pretty was for the daughters whose laughter wasn't silenced by duty. Still, she dreamed. She didn't even know where the dreams came from. But they showed up sometimes, in the folds of the curtain, in the pause before a rooster's crow, in the shadows that danced across cracked walls. When the world was still asleep, Kesi would stand before the broken mirror shard nailed to the back of their bedroom door. The reflection was jagged, crooked, like the world was warning her not to look too closely. But still, she did. And in that moment, just before the day demanded she vanish again, she'd whisper, "Please, just one day, let me be beautiful." Then the world would wake, and Kesi would disappear. Their compound sat tucked at the very edge of the village, neither inside nor out. Not quite near the market, not quite far, just on the forgotten side. The buildings were low and sun-baked, their red clay walls cracked like old skin. Rust crept down the tin rooftops. The air smelled of coal smoke, dried onions, and palm oil that had sizzled too long. Chickens squabbled near torn plastic bags. Children's voices echoed in the distance like a memory, and Kesi moved through it all, invisible. She was always fetching something, folding, sweeping, pouring, stirring. There was always work, and she always knew where it lived. Her father returned every evening with cracked heels and silent eyes. He never raised his hand, never raised his voice. But he never raised his gaze for long either. Kesi would kneel and offer him water. He'd nod without looking and drink in silence. Then he'd remove his cap, sit on the bench, say nothing. She didn't know if he loved her, only that he hadn't left. And in this house, that was its own kind of miracle. He was like the roof, or the front door, something that kept the house standing, but never asked what was inside. One morning, when the sky was still bruised purple and the ground hadn't yet warmed to burn her soles, Kesi lifted her metal basin onto her head and left for the stream. The path wound through patches of wild grass and rusted fences. Mango trees loomed overhead, tall, silent watchers with fruit too high to reach. The dirt was cracked beneath her slippers, but she walked like she always did, steady, quiet, forgotten. This was the one part of the day that belonged to her. No voices, no shouting, no pots banging against firewood, just her breath and the earth beneath her steps. She liked the way the wind moved before the sun fully claimed the sky. It carried a kind of hush, like even the air was allowed to rest. The stream cut through the village like a silver thread, narrow, shallow, but clean, if you got there before everyone else. She stepped carefully onto the slick stones at the edge. Her feet sank into the cool mud. It made her flinch. It always did. She dipped the basin into the water slowly, watched it fill, watched the ripples bend her reflection. This was the only place she could see herself fully, and every time she did, she regretted it. Her eyes felt too big, her skin too dull. Her mouth didn't know how to smile without effort. Her hair, uneven, never long enough to braid, always covered, always hidden. She looked tired, even when she hadn't spoken a word all day. Kesi let out a breath, slow and long. It tasted like smoke and old dreams. "I just want to be seen," she whispered. Not loud, not proud, just real. Then she heard it. Laughter, software bright, like anklet bells during festival season, like mango juice slipping down your wrist on a hot afternoon. She turned sharply. Across the stream stood a girl, about her age, maybe younger. She wore a white lace blouse that shimmered even in the weak morning light. A lilac wrapper was tied neatly at her waist. Her braids were long and perfect, each one smooth and glossy like polished rope. Tiny earrings twinkled in her ears. Her lips were a soft coral pink. The girl didn't carry a basin. She didn't bend. She didn't fetch. She just stood there, watching Kesi. And then she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile girls gave out of pity. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was knowing. They didn't speak that day. Kesi opened her mouth, but the words died before they left. The girl turned and walked away, soft, unbothered, perfect. But the next morning, she returned. And the morning after that, always by the stream, always in something clean, always sitting on a flat rock like she had nowhere else to be. Kesi told herself it didn't matter, but she kept looking, and soon the silence cracked. On the fourth day, the girl spoke. "Do you always come alone?" she asked, head tilted. Kesi glanced down, shrugged. "There's no one to come with." The girl crouched closer to the water. Her wrapper barely touched the stones. She didn't seem to notice the mud. "I'm Aja," she said. "Kesi." Aja nodded slowly. "Pretty name. You don't smile much." Kesi didn't reply. Aja's smile didn't fade. She just kept watching, quiet. Then she said something Kesi would never forget. "You wish you had my life, don't you?" Kesi froze. Her heart beat once, then twice, louder than before. "I never said that," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Aja replied. She stood, smoothed her wrapper. "Some wishes," she said, voice soft as mist. "Don't need words, just eyes." And then she walked away, leaving Kesi breathless. And suddenly, more visible than she had ever been, Aja came back the next morning. And the morning after that, always at the stream, always dressed in something that floated when the breeze passed, sometimes lace, sometimes soft cotton, always clean, always delicate, always untouched. She never carried a basin, never bent to fetch water. She just sat, legs folded beneath her, arms resting gently on her lap, on the same flat rock across from where Kesi crouched each day. She looked like she'd never known dirt under her fingernails, like dust never dared cling to her skin. At first, Kesi said nothing. She focused on her basin, on the ripple of water as it poured, on the cold biting her ankles. But she could feel Aja watching, not judging, not mocking, just seeing. And somehow, that made Kesi feel exposed. They began with silence, then small glances, then half smiles that vanished as quickly as they came. On the fifth morning, Kesi offered a simple greeting. "Good morning." Aja's reply was soft. "It is." Her voice was light, like she'd swallowed sunshine. From that point on, the wall between them began to melt. They talked about simple things. The way the mangoes tasted sweeter at the very end of the season. How sometimes the moon looked like a bruise, and other times like a bowl turned upside down. They talked about the names of trees, how papayas smelled when they were too ripe, which birds made the most annoying noises at dawn. Kesi found herself laughing, once, when her fingers slipped in the stream and her bucket bobbed sideways. Aja didn't laugh at her. She laughed with her, and Kesi didn't realize how rare that was, until it happened. Over the next few days, the conversations stretched like warm dough. Not fast, not urgent, just soft and expanding. Aja asked about her favorite color. Kesi didn't know what to say. No one had ever asked. She guessed maybe yellow, because of the way it looked when it spilled across the dirt in the morning. Aja said hers was lilac, like her wrapper. When she stood, her shadow touched the water first. One morning, Kesi asked something she hadn't planned to. "You ever wish you were someone else?" Aja didn't flinch. She just nodded, slow and sure. Every single day. Kesi dipped her hand into the stream, letting the current tug at her fingers. It was cold, always was. But today it felt sharper, like the question had unsettled something. "Sometimes," Kesi said, "I think I'll die like this. Just a girl with cracked feet and no name." Aja's voice was barely above the wind. "You're not invisible to me." The words fell into Kesi like drops into a dry bucket, unexpected, loud in the silence. She blinked. Her throat felt tight for no reason at all. "I just want to be—" she tried, but her voice broke before the word arrived. Aja didn't press. She simply finished it for her. "Beautiful? Wanted? Chosen?" Kesi nodded. She hadn't realized that was the truth. But the moment Aja said it, it felt like a confession she'd been carrying in her bones. Aja leaned in. Her wrapper brushed the edge of the water, and her voice dropped to a hush. "There's a way," she said. Kesi didn't understand. She tilted her head slightly. "A way?" Aja didn't explain. Not then. She just smiled, soft and slow. And then she left. The next morning, Aja arrived with something wrapped in a small red cloth. She held it with both hands, careful, like it was something sacred. Kesi watched her unwrap it gently. The fabric peeled away to reveal a comb, not plastic, not wood, brass. It gleamed even in the soft grey light of morning. Its teeth were thick and curved, smooth and elegant. The handle was carved with delicate lines that shimmered when turned just right. It didn't look like something meant for hair. It looked like something meant for ceremony. Kesi leaned closer. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Arja nodded. It belonged to my grandmother, and her mother, and her mother before her. She placed it carefully on the flat stone between them. Kesi reached out, hesitated, then touched it with one finger. It was cold. It felt old, like it remembered hands long gone. Arja watched her. "It's not just a comb," she said. Kesi looked up. "Then what is it?" Arja smiled again. "It's a key." They sat there for a long time, neither speaking. The comb lay between them like a secret. Finally, Kesi asked, "To what?" Arja's answer was so quiet, it barely stirred the air. "To each other." Later that evening, they met again by the stream. No words, just hands holding the comb, the red cloth, and a small white candle. Arja explained the ritual. "You light the candle beside the comb," she said. "Say the other girl's name 3 times, then sleep in your own bed." "In the morning?" Arja nodded. "You'll wake up as her." Kesi laughed. It wasn't full, but it was real. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Arja said. "Only for 3 days," she added. Kesi looked down at the comb again. 3 days. 3 days to be beautiful, to be wanted, to be seen. Her fingers grazed the brass again. "Why would you want to be me?" she asked. Arja didn't hesitate. "Sometimes," she said, "you don't want to be admired. You just want to breathe." That night, Kesi moved like a whisper through the compound. The moon was thin, barely a sliver, and the wind rattled dry leaves on the roof. She had hidden the candle in a corner of her wrapper, the comb wrapped and tucked tightly against her side. Her father was already snoring. The night had settled. She lit the candle. The flame was unsteady at first, like it wasn't sure it belonged in this world. She set the comb beside it, metal against wood. Then, with breath catching in her throat, she whispered, "Arja." Again, "Arja." One more time, "Arja." The flame danced once, then went out. The room sank into silence. Kesi crawled beneath her wrapper and closed her eyes. Her heart pounded. She whispered once more, just to herself, "Please." And the night swallowed her whole. She woke to silk. The sheets were soft, so soft they barely touched her skin. The pillow cradled her head like clouds. The air smelled like roses and citrus, sweet and sharp. She sat up slowly. Her eyes moved across the room. Thick golden curtains, smooth tiled floors, walls painted in soft creams and golds. A vanity stood in one corner, a wardrobe the size of her entire bedroom at home, and a mirror. She walked to it, stared, her chest tightened. The girl in the mirror wasn't her. Full lips, bright eyes, hair braided and gleaming. Not Kesi's cracked hands or tired eyes, not her ash-dusted skin. She stepped closer, touched her cheek, software smooth. Her fingers didn't recognize the skin beneath them. It was Arja's face, but it moved when she moved, smiled when she smiled. The switch had worked. She blinked, once, twice, then smiled, slowly. And for the first time in her life, she didn't hate the girl smiling back. A knock at the door startled her. "Madam," a voice said gently, "your bath is ready." Kesi turned, blinking. "Madam." The word felt like something warm being draped across her shoulders. She opened the door. A woman in uniform bowed slightly. "Will you wear the coral set today? Or the blue?" Kesi couldn't speak at first. Then softly, "Blue, please." She walked to the closet. It opened like a secret being told. Clothes lined the walls, soft fabrics, gentle colours, gowns shaped like they'd never known dirt. She chose a light blue dress with lace at the sleeves, pulled it on slowly, felt it float around her like a second skin. Her reflection blinked back at her. She was someone else now. Outside, the car waited. A driver opened the door. People stared as she passed. Not with pity, not with scorn, with awe. Girls whispered behind manicured fingers. Boys straightened when she glanced in their direction. Even the air seemed to move out of her way. She spent the day floating. At home, the chef asked what she preferred for dinner. In her real life, no one had ever asked her what she wanted to eat. That night, Kesi sat before the vanity. She brushed her braids slowly, watched the strands gleam. She touched her lips, traced her cheekbones, twirled once in the mirror just to watch her dress flare. She laughed. She glowed. She was seen. And just before she blew out the lamp, she heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, just outside the door. They paused, then moved on. She held her breath, smiled again. Kesi woke in silk, again. But this time, it didn't feel like luxury. It felt like forgetting. The bed was too soft, the air too still, and the silence. It pressed against her ears like cloth too thick to breathe through. She lay there for a while, staring at the high ceiling above her, its paint smooth and white and untouched. No cobwebs, no peeling, no life. It was morning. She knew because the sun filtered through the golden curtains like warm syrup, but it brought no heat to her skin, just light. She sat up slowly. The sheets slid off her shoulders. Her new skin still glowed, but something in her bones felt dimmer. She stepped into the bathroom. Steam coiled around her ankles as the maid filled the tub with rose-scented water. Kesi didn't ask for roses. They were just there, always there. She undressed and lowered herself into the bath, watching petals drift around her like memories she didn't trust. The water was warm, but it didn't feel like home. Downstairs, breakfast waited. Fruits cut into perfect cubes, tea in a porcelain cup that barely weighed anything in her hands. Arja's mother, Ngozi, sat across the table with a tablet in hand and her eyes somewhere far away. "You're going to be late for school," she said, without looking up. Kesi nodded. There was nothing else to say. No one asked how she slept. No one mentioned the footsteps that paused outside her door again last night. She ate in silence. Each bite tasted rich, but left her emptier. At school, she walked through the gates in silence. Heads turned, smiles flickered. A few girls waved, some boys stared. Later, the girls swarmed around her at break. Compliments rolled off their tongues like sugar. "You're glowing, Arja. What's your skin routine?" "Those earrings. They have to be from Italy." Kesi smiled on cue, nodded when expected. But when she turned her back, she saw their reflections in the window. Eyes rolling, lips curling. One girl whispered something. The others laughed. Their faces looked like admiration, but their mouths, they were carving something else. One girl leaned in close and said, "Sweet as palm wine. You're lucky you're pretty. It hides everything else." Kesi didn't know what that meant. Not yet. That evening, she returned to the house in silence. The driver opened her door with a stiff nod. She climbed the steps slowly, her shoes too quiet on the marble. Inside, the house was cold in a way that had nothing to do with air. She wandered into the sitting room. Ngozi was on the phone, her voice too loud, her laugh too bright. Kesi stood there, watching the shine of the chandelier, the smoothness of the walls, the way nothing ever moved unless someone made it. She walked upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "How does it feel?" She didn't answer. Another message followed. A photo, Kesi in Arja's body, standing at the stream. Head tilted, eyes glowing. She dropped the phone. Her hands shook. Then, something moved behind the curtain. She turned. Nothing. Just the sway of fabric. She walked to the window, pulled the curtain back, locked it, then locked the door. Then, on the dresser, tucked beside a perfume bottle, sat a small silver frame. She picked it up. A photo. A man in a crisp white shirt, one arm around a much younger Arja. Kesi stared. There was something too familiar about his face. The smile, the eyes, the way he stood. She didn't know his name, but she had a feeling she would soon. Later, as she tried to sleep, she heard it again. A sound, a scratch, then footsteps. Soft, slow, stopping just outside her door. The knob turned. Just once. Not enough to open. Just enough to remind her that someone had been there before. She stared at the door, then pulled her legs up beneath the wrapper, held the comb close to her chest, and waited for the night to pass. The next morning, she didn't smile at breakfast. Ngozi noticed. "You're not still upset about that boy, are you?" Kesi blinked. "What boy?" Ngozi rolled her eyes. "Whatever it is, fix your face. We have a brunch to attend." They rode in silence. The car was too quiet. The driver didn't speak. The streets blurred past, but Kesi couldn't feel herself moving. The city outside was beautiful, clean, bright. But through the window, it looked like glass over a museum exhibit, like she wasn't part of it, just watching. At the table, the man smiled too long, called her princess in a voice that made her stomach turn. Then he rested his hand on her shoulder. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't brief. His palm lingered, heavy, warm, claiming space it had no right to. And that's when she knew. The man from the photo. The man Arja never spoke about. Arja's uncle. And now, wearing Arja's skin, he was hers too. Her body tensed before her mind even caught up. And though her face was not her own, her skin remembered everything it never experienced. But no one at the table looked up, not even Ngozi. So, she sat still, her breath shallow, the weight of his hand burning long after it left. When the waiter poured her water, she looked down at the glass. Her reflection rippled, then warped. She didn't recognize the girl looking back, but the girl smiled and didn't blink. Kesi looked up quickly. The waiter asked if everything was all right. She nodded. Her throat was dry. That night, she didn't go straight to bed. She sat at the vanity, brushing her braids slowly. 1 stroke, 2, 3. Her eyes in the mirror looked tired. Not on the outside, on the inside, like her soul was wearing heels too tight. She touched her cheek. Still smooth, still glowing. but it didn't feel earned. It felt borrowed. She opened the wardrobe and stared at the rows of dresses. Silk, lace, linen, colors that shimmered when you turned your head. She ran her fingers across the fabric. Each one was softer than the last, but none of them felt like hers. She returned to the bed, lay down without changing, held the comb in one hand, pressed it to her chest. 3 days, she whispered. Her voice trembled. Just 3 days. But the candle she lit earlier had already burned down. The flame never flickered. She closed her eyes. But the silence stayed loud, and somewhere outside, footsteps returned. And didn't leave. She didn't sleep. She just waited for the third morning to save her. Kesi woke before the sun touched the sky. The silk sheets were warm. The pillow still smelled of citrus and rose water. The air was still, like the house itself was holding its breath. But something inside her was screaming. She sat up quickly. Her heart raced, thudding against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. She rushed to the vanity. The brass comb was still there, resting where she had placed it the night before. Too still, too quiet. Her hands trembled as she lit the white candle beside it. She didn't hesitate this time. "Kesi," she whispered. "Kesi. Kesi." The flame flickered. Once. Then died. Nothing happened. She stood frozen, her fingers curled tight into her palms. She relit the candle. Tried again. "Kesi. Kesi. Kesi." Her voice cracked on the last repetition. She blew out the candle, opened her eyes, and saw the same face in the mirror. Still Aja's, still glowing, still smiling. But it wasn't her. Panic surged through her veins like fire. She grabbed the edge of the vanity, pressed her forehead to the mirror. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Her voice was a breath, a plea, a warning to herself. She tried again, lit the candle, spoke the names, held the comb. Each time, nothing. The mirror just stared back, silent, cold, final. She ran, didn't change, didn't think. She bolted out the door in her silk wrapper, feet bare, hair half-braided. The marble floor stung her soles. The front door slammed behind her. The driver called after her once, but she didn't stop. She flew down the road, past hedges and gold-plated gates, past guards and maids and neighbors who stared at her like she was mad. She didn't care. The sky was grey. The clouds hung heavy, like they knew what was coming. When she reached the stream, her chest burned from running. Her wrapper clung to her knees. Her feet were muddy. Her breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. But the rocks were empty. No one waited on the flat stone. No Aja, no welcome. Just water and silence. Then she saw it, folded neatly on the rock, wrapped in the same red cloth the comb had once rested in. Kesi moved slowly now. Her legs felt hollow. She reached for it with trembling hands, unfolded it. Read the note. "You wanted my life. Now you have it. I don't want it back." Her knees buckled. She dropped to the stone and let out a sound she didn't recognize. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a scream. It was grief breaking out before the body knew what to do with it. She clutched the note to her chest and rocked, back and forth, back and forth. The water beside her flowed, uncaring. Birds chirped in the trees like the world was still fine. But Kesi knew. The world had changed, and she wasn't in it anymore. She didn't know how long she sat there. Hours, maybe. The sun rose higher, the clouds shifted. A breeze swept through the trees. But she didn't move. Not until her legs began to cramp. Not until her skin itched with drying mud. Not until the last thread of denial unraveled. Then slowly, she stood and walked back toward the house that wasn't hers. The gates opened for her without a word. The staff bowed. She walked through marble and gold like a ghost, up the stairs, into the bedroom. She closed the door, locked it. The next morning, Kesi didn't speak. She stayed in the room with the curtains drawn, the mirror covered, and the brass comb resting in her lap. It no longer felt like magic. It felt like evidence. She turned it over slowly. On the back, carved deep into the metal, were 2 small letters. E-U. She hadn't seen them before. Or maybe she had. Just hadn't known to look. She sat on the floor, her back against the vanity, the brass comb still warm in her lap, almost pulsing. The air in the room thickened. She didn't know how, didn't know why. But the moment her fingers wrapped around the brass comb, something shifted. Memories that weren't hers began to rise, not like dreams, not like guesses, like stories burned into the teeth of the comb itself. Heavy, raw, as if Ija had lived them, and the comb had kept them. Sealed, silent, until someone desperate enough dared to hold it. And in Kesi's mind's eye, Aja's story began to unfold. Aja was 7 when she first asked who her father was. It was during a thunderstorm, the kind that makes walls shake and children press their faces into pillows. Aja stood in the hallway, watching her mother pour a drink in the kitchen. The woman didn't flinch when Aja asked. She just tightened her scarf, tossed a cube of ice into the cup and said, "He left. He chose someone else. That's all you need to know." But the question never left Aja. It followed her everywhere, in the way she looked at other girls holding their father's hands, in the way her mother drank just a little more on Sundays. At 8, Aja learned that silence was safer than questions. At 9, she learned what it meant to be beautiful. Her mother made sure of it. "You stand like this," she'd say, adjusting Aja's chin. "Smile, but only a little. Show elegance, not teeth." She taught her how to sit, how to speak in public, how to cross her ankles, never her legs, how to wear discomfort like pearls. But no one taught her how to run when the uncle started watching too long. No one told her what to do when his footsteps paused outside her door. One night, she heard the creak of wood, the slow turn of a doorknob. She froze, held her breath under the blanket. The door never opened, but he had been there, watching, waiting. The next morning, she told her mother. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled. But her mother's reply was cold, sharp, and practiced. "You will not ruin this family. We've worked too hard to earn respect." Aja didn't argue. She just learned. Learned how to tuck fear under her tongue, how to smile when her skin screamed, how to make herself quiet, invisible, perfect. And one night, her uncle didn't pause at the door. He entered. By 12, she knew the rules of the house. Don't speak unless spoken to. Never talk back. Never call attention to what should be buried. She became the daughter her mother demanded. Polished, silent, decorative. But something inside her began to rot. At 13, she found a photo tucked in the back of a drawer. A man stood beside her mother, smiling, arm around her waist. The woman in the photo looked younger, but the pain was still in her eyes. Aja flipped the photo over. In faded blue ink, a name, Ugochukwu. She traced the letters over and over again, whispering them like a prayer. It was the first time she ever said her father's name. At 14, she followed her mother through the market. They were buying tomatoes and ogbono seeds. The heat was thick, sticking to her wrapper, making her skin itch. Then she saw him. The man from the photo, same eyes, same smile. He was laughing. And beside him, a girl, dusty feet, worn wrapper, bright eyes. She was laughing too. He reached down and touched the girl's back gently. "Kesi, come." He said it like he meant it, like the name had always belonged to his tongue. Aja didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there and watched him choose someone else. She didn't speak for 3 days after that, not a single word, but something broke open in her that afternoon. Something that could not be put back. Her father hadn't died. He hadn't disappeared. He had simply moved on, built a new life, raised another child. While she stayed behind with the man who opened her door at night, and he hadn't come back to stop it. At 15, she returned to her grandmother's village. Her mother said it was to learn roots. But Aja knew it was because the house had grown too small for the truth she now carried. She spent long days under trees, listening to old women talk about spirits, about seasons, about what the world used to be before men started breaking it. She was quiet, but she watched. Always watched. One evening, while helping her grandmother clean the attic, she found it. A comb, brass, heavy, wrapped in a red cloth. Her grandmother paused, took it, held it with 2 hands. "This," she said, "is a mirror key." Aja blinked. "A what?" "A key that opens more than knots," her grandmother whispered. "It opens lives." Aja asked how. Her grandmother only said, "But only if the wish comes from both sides." And so, Aja waited. She returned home, back to the house, back to the silence, back to the uncle who still looked too long. She smiled when spoken to, did as she was told. But inside, she was listening, watching, learning. She followed Kesi for weeks, at the stream, in the distance. She memorized the rhythm of her steps, her silences, her routines, her sadness. And then, one morning, she heard it. Kesi's whisper, barely audible over the stream. "I just want to be beautiful. Just for one day." That was all it took. The wish had been made, from both sides, and the mirror key turned. Now Kesi sat in the house Aja escaped from, wearing her skin, holding her silence, and beginning to understand that this was never a gift, it was a trade. Kesi came back into herself with a jolt, gasping like she'd been pulled from underwater. The comb was still in her hand. But everything else had shifted. The air, the silence, even the light in the room felt colder, like it too had heard the truth. Her cheeks were wet. She hadn't noticed the tears. She looked at her hands. They were trembling, and in her lap, the comb pulsed once and went still. She knew now. This hadn't been magic. It had been a map. Aja hadn't chosen her at random. She had watched her, followed her, waited for her to whisper a wish. And Kesi, she said yes. That was all it took. Her mind spun, but one thought slammed against her ribs like thunder. Her father was also Aja's father. She said it aloud. The room didn't move, but the walls felt tighter, and with that one truth, the entire story unraveled. Aja hadn't wanted Kesi's life. She wanted her father, the man who gave Kesi love and left Aja in silence, the man who built one daughter's world while another lived in ruin. Kesi wasn't living a dream. She was locked inside the revenge of a girl who'd been left behind. Somewhere across town, Aja was probably smiling, probably calling him Papa, probably sitting at the table where Kesi once knelt, probably soaking in a life that was never meant to be hers. And Kesi? Kesi was a memory now, trapped in a life wrapped in silk, surrounded by gold, haunted by footsteps, and owned by silence. Her mind raced back to the stream, that first smile, that first silence, how Aja knew things Kesi never said, the way she watched, waited, listened. She had been planning this, every meeting, every moment. It wasn't friendship, it was preparation. She remembered Aja's eyes, always so calm, so still, too still. She remembered the faint bruises beneath her sleeve, the one time she pulled her wrapper tighter when Kesi looked too long. She remembered the way Aja had touched the comb, not like a gift, like a weapon, and her words. Sometimes, you don't want to be admired. You just want to breathe. Kesi turned the comb over, ran her thumb across the initials. E-U. The name rose in her mind like smoke. Ezine Ugochukwu, her father's mother. It was inheritance. A thread of pain passed from one forgotten woman to the next, and now it had landed in Kesi's lap, like it had been waiting for her all along. Kesi stopped crying 3 days ago. The tears had simply run out. She wasn't sure when. Now there was only silence. Not the kind that offers peace, the kind that wraps around you like wet cloth, heavy, cold, and hard to shake. She moved through the house like a guest, a ghost, a girl-shaped shadow. She ate when called, sat when asked, smiled when expected, and no one noticed anything strange, because she looked perfect. The mirror, however, noticed. The mirror didn't care about performance. The mirror told the truth. So she covered it, draped a cloth over its face like a body prepared for burial. But still, she felt its pull. Every time she passed that part of the room, something inside her shifted. Every time her foot creaked on the tile, her heart held its breath. The mirror may have been blind, but it remembered. That night, the hallway creaked again. Kesi didn't wait. She pushed the drawer against the door, then the stool, then her suitcase. She slept with the comb pressed flat beneath her palm. The footsteps still came, paused, then moved on. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She simply closed her eyes and counted her breaths, like prayers, like locks on a door. The next day, her uncle visited. He entered without knocking, his footsteps soft, familiar. She kept her eyes on the floor. He greeted her with a smile, a hand on her shoulder, too firm, too long. She didn't flinch this time. She just breathed, slow and shallow. He asked her how she was. She said, "Fine." Then excused herself before the silence grew teeth. She went and stood by the window. Children played outside. A group of girls skipped rope. One wore a torn wrapper and dusty slippers. Her laugh was loud and reckless and full of joy. Kesi watched her, watched the dust rise as she ran, watched her slap another girl on the arm and fall to the ground laughing. She remembered that laugh. She remembered that dust. She remembered what it meant to have nothing, but still be free. That night, she uncovered the mirror, faced herself. Her skin still glowed. Her lips still held shape. Her braids were neat, her collarbone graceful. But her eyes belonged to someone who had stopped asking to be seen. She whispered, "Give it back." Just once, to no one in particular, not expecting an answer, just needing to hear herself say it. Then she lowered her head, hands trembling, heart hollow, silence pressing in like heat. And slowly, she looked back up at the glass. But it didn't show her Aja. It didn't show her Kesi. It showed a girl the world wanted to admire. So badly, they'd ignore everything else. The girl with the perfect skin, the soft voice, the good posture, the one they called graceful, poised, polished, not knowing what watched them behind her eyes. Downstairs, she heard laughter, the clink of glasses, another brunch, another photo opportunity. Her uncle's voice drifted up the stairs, low, casual, too familiar. She froze. A chill ran through her ribs and settled in her spine. She was no longer waiting for footsteps outside her door. She was living inside the room they always entered. There would be no waking up, no undoing, no switching back. She had inherited Aja's skin, but also her silence, her fear, her curse. This wasn't punishment, it was consequence. So, Kesi stood, frozen, breath shallow enough to disappear. She knew that outside, the world would keep praising her, not for who she was, but for how well she hid. Because this is what they never tell you. When a beautiful girl suffers, no one believes she's hurting. They just say, "She looks well," and keep looking. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just stayed still. Because this beautiful girl had already died quietly, and no one ever noticed the funeral in her eyes. I hope this story reminds you that not every prayer is meant to be answered. Kesi wanted beauty, Aja wanted escape, and both believed the other held freedom in her hands. But the truth was never in the mirror. It was in the silence that raised them, the shadows that shaped them, and the lies that taught them to envy what they did not know. So remember, never assume someone else's life is easier just because it shines on the outside. You don't know what someone is surviving. Not every smile means peace. Not every glow means joy. And not every pretty life is safe. Because some funerals don't need caskets. They just need a girl no one listened to, lying still enough to be forgotten.